Hi, I'm Erin Templeton, and I'm on the board of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Society, and I'm here today with Bruce Johnson. Bruce, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and why we're speaking this afternoon?
Thank you, Erin. My pleasure. I'm a writer and a book publisher. My specialty is the American arts and crafts movement. So I've written extensively about Gustav Stickley, Elbert Hubbard, potteries, Groovy, and Rookwood. And each year I host the annual National Arts and Crafts Conference, in which we bring in seminar speakers, demonstrators, have a large antique show along with that as well. And everything is focused on the arts and crafts era in America, 1895 to 1939.
So where are you today?
Well, I think that maybe we can give a few clues for your audience and see if they can guess where I might be at today. Let's see if the first one would be. Let's start with not the Valley of Ashes, but the city. And then a little spelling test here, in the darkest hour. And finally, with a tangent that hopefully we'll get to follow up on, hungry like the wolf. Again, important on how it's being spelled here. So does that help anybody out?
Getting a very strong Duran Duran vibe.
I think we're a little bit before you on that.
Yeah, right. The valley, so Gatsby, but not Gatsby. The city in the darkest hour, hungry like the wolf. Yeah. So I'm gonna guess because of the spelling, wolf. We're talking about Thomas Wolfe,
right?
And not the Valley of Ashes, but the City of Ashes.
Where did Thomas Wolfe live?
Fitzgerald expert. But maybe we have a Thomas Wolfe expert in the audience. I'm going to bump it back up to number one, Valley of Ashes, but the city. Another word for city. I'm studying French right now, so I'm going to go with ville, Asheville.
All right, we'll give you're part way there. How about a little bit more, a little closer then?
In the darkest hour. I'm getting that. So you're at a hotel.
That is
the spelling. It's got to be the Grove Park.
Got to be.
Got to be the Grove Park.
Yeah, built in 1913. The Grove Park Inn is probably one of the finest examples of arts and crafts architecture anywhere in the country.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, what you're seeing there is the main inn, which opened up in 1913, had approximately 150 rooms. And actually today I'm sitting in room 441, is where F. Scott Fitzgerald lived during most of 1935 and 1936 here in Asheville.
And so you are in the room that he lived in right now.
Yes.
And is that a picture of him behind you on the table there?
It certainly is. One of his books, the Grove Park Inn. I've been working with the Grove Park Inn. I've been their historian since I arrived in Asheville in around 1988. And so we figured out that this was room 441, was what F. Scott Fitzgerald stayed while he was in Asheville for those 2 years. And so they've redone the room. They've got some pictures of he and Zelda and Scotty on the wall, and have fixed it up similar to how it would have been in 1935, 1936. In fact, I think you're gonna see a little bit of a silent movie here. I'm sitting in that chair right there. Just can't see for a moment. And this is the F. Scott Fitzgerald room. This room connects to the room next to it, 443. And what they did for him was in 443, they took the beds out and put in a couch. So he had a living room in one side with an inner adjoining door. And then he had the bedroom here on the other side. And in 1935, 1936, I do believe it was probably one bed here at the time. I'm not sure on that. But this is where F. Scott Fitzgerald lived. And if you notice the windows in the background, a lot of people, when they stay at the Grove Park Inn, they want windows on the other side of the hotel because that overlooks the French Broad River Valley, Asheville, and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Fitzgerald, however, with his always had the eye for an attractive lady throughout his life. And he specifically wanted a room on the 4th floor on this side of the hotel as it overlooks the piazza down below, where he would see each guest as they arrived and got out of their taxi cab or their car, so he could scan the incoming guests in case there was somebody he wanted to hustle down the stairs and perhaps to meet in the Great Hall.
That's amazing. And I think that we had just seen before the video a couple of other historical pictures. Yes.
Right. Yeah, the Great Hall, which you'll see on the right-hand side, has not one fireplace, but there's actually 2 fireplaces at either end of the Great Hall. It is sort of medieval looking, and you can see by the size, the women in the photograph standing in front of the fireplace, you could literally park a car inside that fireplace. It was inspired by the fireplace in the Old Faithful Inn at Yellowstone. But when E.W. Grove and his son-in-law, Fred Seeley, decided to build the Grove Park Inn, they decided they would have not 1, but 2 fireplaces. So there's one of these at either end of the Great Hall, and looking much like it looks right there in the photograph. Some of the furnishings have changed, but the fireplaces haven't, and they are a gathering place for everybody in the evening. So many hotels you go to, people disappear into their rooms at night. Here at the Grove Park Inn, they all congregate down in the Great Hall, as Fitzgerald did himself as well. And on the left, you'll see the old hickory rockers. This picture would have been taken around 1913, based on, what we know about the photographs and the clothing of the people sitting there. But many people came here just to, as Fitzgerald did. His reason for coming to Asheville was because he thought he had tuberculosis. Turned out what he had was, alcoholism, insomnia, dependence on some drugs, and he was pretty much worn out. But a lot of people came here because they wanted that clean mountain air, and so they spent a lot of time just sitting in rocking chairs, taking in the views around the hotel.
Wow, these photographs are amazing. So you already have touched on this a little bit, but let's speak a little bit more about specifically. So Fitzgerald was there, you said, in 1935 and 1936. And so this is the time after Tender as the Night has been published. It hasn't done particularly well, commercially speaking. As you mentioned, he's having some health issues. He's exhausted. His drinking is a problem. He's sort of between projects, and Zelda is not too far away.
No, it was, when I first discovered it, and I should mention too, my first career was that of a high school English teacher, and F. Scott Fitzgerald was somebody I taught during my 5 years of teaching before I became a full-time writer. And I must say, I was so excited to arrive in Asheville and find out that not only did Thomas Wolfe grow up here, but F. Scott Fitzgerald lived here for 2 years. But then my balloon was popped when I found out that it was possibly the 2 worst years of his life. He had hit rock bottom. He spent much of his time here in room 441 drinking and writing letters. And many of the letters he wrote were to friends begging for money. He was broke. During his time here, his mother actually passed away, but he didn't even go back to St. Paul for her funeral. But he made sure that he did get from his sister his part of the inheritance because he desperately needed the money. So Scott, it's a low period for Scott. There's no doubt about it. And I don't want to sound like I'm coming down hard on him. But he attempted, his idea of going on the wagon was meant that he didn't drink hard liquor, but he did drink beer. And we have reports from the bellman, because he was a semi-famous person, even in 1935 and 36, even if he was a sort of a sad famous person. And he was, languishing in the shadow being cast by Ernest Hemingway, who was extremely popular, and Thomas Wolfe, whose book, Look Homeward Angel, came out in 1929 and did far better than did Tender as the Night. So, he was sort of languishing in a lot of self-pity at the time, and he was here to try to revive his reputation as a short story writer. He had pretty much put aside writing another novel, at least at this time in his life. But the problem with his short stories, as we all know, was that they were totally out of touch with what was going on during the Great Depression. So as a result, he was getting rejection slips. At a time when, prior to this, he might get $1,500, $2,000 for a short story. Now he was selling them to Esquire for a few $100s and asking for advances before he even finished the stories. So it was a low time for him. In 1936, he brought Zelda down. He put Zelda in a sanitarium where they dealt with both people with mental illnesses, which Zelda certainly qualified, and people with tuberculosis. Highlands Hospital was just 1 mile away from where the Grove Park Inn is. And so Scott would bring Zelda to the Grove Park Inn, and she would stay here at times. And they had outings together, but during his time here, he carried on at least 2 affairs, which wasn't totally out of character for him, while Zelda was here at the hospital. And so 1935, 1936, he's here. 1936, he turns 40 years old. He agrees to give what he thought was going to be an interview that was going to revive his literary reputation. Instead, it was basically his literary obituary. And here in room 441, just a few feet away from where I'm sitting right now, F. Scott Fitzgerald attempted suicide by taking a handful of pain pills that he'd been given for a dislocated shoulder that he suffered here. And had it not been for the fact that someone alerted the nurse and they got him to discharge his barbiturates, that the Grove Park Inn avoided being the site where F. Scott Fitzgerald died. So glad that didn't happen here.
For sure. So not long after this, things kind of turn around for him, and he leaves North Carolina.
Yeah, his agent, Harold Ober, had been working for a long time to get Fitzgerald a gig out in Hollywood. It was not unheard of. William Faulkner, when his, in between books, William Faulkner took a train out to California and wrote a screenplay, and it was not unusual for writers to do that sort of thing when their books weren't selling well, especially during the 30s. And so Fitzgerald was begging his agent to get him a job working on one of the movies. And so, and Ober did that. So by 1937, Fitzgerald was on his way to California, where he lived out the rest of his very brief life. Eventually, dying of a heart attack brought on by a hard life.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up a little bit, first of all, I want to call our viewers' attention to your 2 books, which are on display on the screen. We see one that is specifically about the Fitzgeralds and also Thomas Wolfe, and the other one that is about the Grove Park Inn as a place, which I think probably touches on these personalities a little bit too, but also wraps in a lot of the other things that you mentioned very early on in our conversation. So if our viewers were going to come to Asheville, in addition to seeing the beautiful Grove Park Inn, where else would you recommend that they visit?
Well, for a literary stop, just about a mile from here, downtown Asheville, is the Thomas Wolfe Home and Museum. You don't want to miss that. It's a wonderful turn of the century Victorian home that his mother ran as a boarding house, and the Wolfe children grew up in, and that house has been totally restored. It's a wonderful step back in time. And so you definitely want to go to the Thomas Wolfe house and then walk around downtown Asheville. Downtown Asheville was spared the urban renewal destruction of the 1960s. So it has lots of those 2- and 3-story brick storefronts with great shops, galleries, bars, music venues. It's a great walking downtown. And then south of town is the Biltmore Estate, 250 room home of George and Edith Vanderbilt, completed in 1895. Vanderbilts lived there until George Vanderbilt died in 1914. You spend a whole day there. Anybody who tries to do the Biltmore House in 2 or 3 hours will be sorely disappointed. They've expanded to include a wonderful winery, hiking trails, shops. They even have their own hotel now as well. And then the other stop on your literary tour should be down to Flat Rock, Hendersonville area, where Carl Sandburg had a farm, and the Carl Sandburg farm and his wife Lillian's herd of prize-winning goats are still there, and it again is a wonderful day in and of itself. So as I tell people, if you're coming to Asheville, you want to have 2 or 3 days to really soak it all in, to drive around on the Blue Ridge Parkway. We have whitewater rafting. For the golfers, there are 3 historic Donald Ross golf courses in Asheville. I'm not a golfer, but I don't know of any other city that has 3 Donald Ross courses at it. It's just a wonderful place. I know I sound like the Chamber of Commerce here. I grew up in Illinois on a very flat prairie, and I came to Western North Carolina in the 1980s, and I love it dearly. It's a great place to visit, and if you have the opportunity, it's also a great place to live.
Thank you so much for your time today, Bruce. We really appreciate it.
Erin, I've enjoyed it.